Hello and welcome to Downtime Activities. Matt here. Today we're going to be going over a brief how-to on writing your own Dread story and questionnaires to run a game in the Dread system. If you don't know what the Dread system is, it's a horror RPG kind of suspense role-playing game that uses a Jenga tower instead of rolling dice. If you want more information, we have a review on our channel going over the system and our opinions on it. Please feel free to check that out. We also have a live game that we recorded that should be up on the channel before this one is. I recommend watching it before watching this because I'm going to be using it as kind of my example on how I go about writing one of these stories. And there will be major spoilers for that story in this because of that. So if you want that story to kind of get to stay as a surprise, watch it. I'll give you a second. You can then come back here and check out this how-to.
Writing your own Dread game can be a pretty intimidating prospect. It's a lot like writing your own horror movie. It seems like there is a lot to get done before you'll be able to run a game. But I've come up with a pretty simplified step-by-step system in order to go through and make a fun, engaging game for your players. Step 1. Decide the villain or villains in your game. This will vary wildly depending on the genre that you're making your horror game take place in. But you have to pick what the threat is that the characters are trying to fight against or run away from or survive. In my recent game I ran, I chose clowns and strongmen and other freak shows in a carnival that were all cannibals trying to eat the kids that the players were playing. The threat is the key part of any sort of horror movie. It is the thing that's constantly coming after the players and threatening their lives. The thing that is making them make pulls from the tower. So it is the first step in making your game. Once it's been decided, then you need to choose the location your game is taking place in and put the players in a cage in this location. Now, this could literally be a cage, although that may not be particularly exciting. However, a cage or a enclosurement around the players is required to keep them inside the action. You don't want an easy out for your players. You don't want an open door they can run through that makes it so that the threat is no longer threatening them. For the game I recently ran, I put a barbed wire fence around the carnival grounds and gave them a task they had to finish before they were comfortable leaving the carnival. Something along those lines is needed to make sure that the players stay engaged in the action and don't have an easy out on the threat that's chasing them down. This can simply be that your players are out in the middle of nowhere, and they don't know what direction is safety, so there's not really any out for them until they stumble into it. There's lots of ways to do this. The key here is make sure the players don't have an easy escape. The next step is give the players an objective. This objective can be as simple as survive, or be something a little more complicated or convoluted. In my recent game, the objective they had was save the little brother. A little brother of one of the players was taken by these cannibal clowns, and he had to be saved before they could leave, or at least should be if they want to save their little brother, right? So that works in a way as part of that previous step, putting them in a cage, but these things all tie together. The objective should be something that they want or need to accomplish in order to win or escape or survive the story. Once you've decided on your villain, decided where this is going to take place, you've made something limiting the player's ability to escape and given them a task to go and do, the next step is picking on just who those characters are. This is once again very dependent on the story you're trying to tell. Are your characters a bunch of sci-fi astronauts trapped on a spaceship, or are they college students on a trip deep in the woods? For my story, these were middle schoolers. Teens, preteens who were going to the carnival and had the kind of problems that 8th graders have. This helps define the story further and helps you make the questionnaires later on. Once you've decided the kinds of characters that will exist in your story, the next step is picking specific characters. So, to use my recent game as an example, I decided that my story would take place in a carnival where middle schoolers are trying to survive these cannibal monsters. The specific sort of characters from there were decided on by just kind of going through some classic tropes of middle schoolers. I knew that there was going to be an older sibling to the little brother who was going to get taken, and I picked an older sister. I decided to have her kind of be the classic pretty girl in school who's popular. From there, I picked the boy who is really interested in the cute girl and wants to impress her no matter what. And then from there, it was just kind of picking some other childhood tropes to be the best friends of these two characters. So for the older sister, pretty girl character, there was another kind of popular girl who had a little bit of different background stuff for her, and was kind of a fun contrast to the wannabe boyfriend by making her kind of tilt in the direction of not supporting their relationship. But that's a whole note off to the side. And then for some two super loyal best friends to the wannabe boyfriend, I picked the classic fat friend and nerdy friend trope, and now I have my full cast of characters. These are fun, tropey kind of characters that really fit in this story. Your story can vary very much from this, so just make sure that the individuals are all something that feel like they fit in the story being told, that match the type of person who would be in this situation, and are distinct from each other and interesting. Once all of this is decided, next comes probably the hardest part, apart from maybe writing the questionnaires, and that is writing out your sort of bullet point story outline. Different people will go about writing this differently. A lot of people will write out whole paragraphs and whole descriptions of what they want to have happen in their game. I find this as unnecessary and time-consuming, so I instead make a bullet point list of story notes that I want to make sure are hit. This bullet point list will give me a step-by-step to kind of go along with as the story is moving, while leaving plenty of space in between to make sure that the players are given lots of options and choice in shifting and changing the story. You can write a full long list of things out, or a full long story basically, with just hoping the characters will follow along, but if you've ever run a game before, you know that players never really do what you expect. So you have to be prepared for the unexpected. And that means little gaps in your story plan can just be what the players fill in. For the recent game I ran, I had story notes such as Part 1, Experience the Carnival. And it's just a couple of bullet points of things that I thought would be creepy and kind of set the mood. So things like a clown staring at one of the players through a window, or a lost and found trailer with an unusually large amount of children's clothes. These kind of things are just things that set the mood and start the story spiraling towards the creepy conclusion that's coming up. From there, it's just up to the players where they're going and what they're doing at the carnival, and I follow that up with the next story beat, which is the little brother goes missing, and the players start looking for him to no avail. This is another chance where I have a loose idea, but the players are really driving the story however they want. They are choosing where to go and look for this little brother, and it's up to me to make them feel like they maybe are getting close, but never actually find him, to keep the suspense and the story moving on. From there, I had the idea of getting them guided to a mirror maze and locked in until nightfall. This puts them in the carnival after dark when everyone else is away, and now the real monsters are coming out. The once jovial carnival staff are now crazy cannibals hunting them down and trying to get them. And I just love this picturesque moment of the mirror maze door finally opening and the strongman coming in to try and grab the kids and them having to run away. From there, it's the look for the little brother while avoiding carnival staff section. So I similarly just have little bullet points of things that I want to make sure are in play, but it's up to the players where they're going and what they're doing, so I don't want to be overly on rails with my thought process on running the game. It's very freeform and sandbox at this point. They're looking around trying to find the kid, and I kind of just keep that going for as long as feels appropriate, as long as I can keep that tension, until a moment where I feel like the reveal can happen. And that reveal will be the little brother chained up in a kitchen trailer with a big fat clown chef preparing a stew pot to cook him in. This allows me to have the story keep moving until I have a good time to make the next story beat hit. This lets the players be very creative and do what they want to do, search for the little kid in the way they want to, and requires me to be able to think on my feet and keep the story interesting and the suspense going, but it makes for really fun gameplay. When the timing feels appropriate, I can have one of them, in one way or another, stumble upon the little brother's location, where he's chained up in a kitchen trailer with a big fat clown chef preparing to cook him in a stew pot, and then it's up to them to save him and find a way to escape the grounds. I prefer this outline, bullet point way of story writing. It's much more simple and much less time consuming than going through and writing a big, long, full story. It allows me to have tons of flexibility, but have the notes I need to look to make sure that I keep the feel and the suspense going in the game. I don't like wasting energy. I don't think you guys like to either, so I think this is the perfect way to have enough notes to get through without wasting any effort. The next step is deciding on your victory condition for the game. This is the final step of writing your story. This is the condition that has to be met for your players to be considered as succeeding at your story of dread. For my story, this was saving the little brother and getting out of the fences before the carnival cannibals track them down. This could be a lot of different things, however. Depending on your story, there's a lot of different things that can be seen as the victory condition. For some stories, it might be defeating and even killing the villain or monster that's chasing you down. It might also simply be surviving until day comes again and not dying in the night to whatever the horror is. Your story will determine this, but it is an important thing in learning when the game will actually end. With your story written, your characters decided upon, the last and sometimes trickiest part is writing out your player questionnaires. It's hard to know where to start here, and there's a lot of ways you can take it. What I'm going to do here is give a kind of outline, a rough idea of how I tend to lay out my questionnaires, but it's important that you understand these will vary very much depending on the story being told. First off, I tend to ask a couple of questions that establish who the characters are, how old they are, what jobs they have if they have a job, what part of the world they live in perhaps, these kind of things, just to give the player a sense of who they're playing. Next, I'll usually give a couple questions that establish skills or items that the players have. This can mean that they get to choose or that I tell them that they're a ship's mechanic so they understand that their character has mechanic skills. I really like giving a question here that has a pretty open-ended idea though, saying that you have a skill that most people would be surprised by. What is it? And then the players get to come up with something that may or may not come into play, but if it does, it makes them feel really clever for coming up with it. The item is similar here. I tend to give a kind of guideline to what sort of item it can be, but let the player decide, and then they have something on them that they can creatively use to solve problems. Next up, I'll usually ask a couple questions that establish how the characters act. This is a good time to lean into some of those tropes of characters, and also to give the characters some sort of disabilities or things that will come up in gameplay that can get them into trouble. This kind of rolls over into the next set of questions, which tend to be a couple questions that will aid them in driving my story in the right direction. That means that if I want a player who's really brave to kind of help push the characters to do things that the rest of the group may not, I put this here so that the player knows that, oh yeah, my character's brave, he would go and he would do this thing. Similarly, I can put detriments here that are things that could get the group into trouble and get that particular player into situations where they're having to make pulls from the tower. A couple of last notes here on the questionnaire. Always throw in some spice throughout, questions that may or may not be relevant, but just get an idea of who the character is or what the setting might be. An example of this in my recent one was asking the players what their favorite food was. This had no real bearing on the story at all, but in a story all about creepy clowns trying to eat people, the idea of food being fresh in their minds seemed like it could be a cool mental game to play with my players. Lastly, a optional thing to do here, but something I tend to recommend, would be establishing character relationships through some of the questions in your questionnaire. This allows the players to have a sense of who the other characters in this story are and what they may or may not know about those characters, relationships they have between each other, which characters they like and dislike, and also gives you the opportunity as the person running the game to set some players up as a detriment to others. This can be really fun when a particularly selfish character dislikes another character in the group and leaves them for dead in a key moment. Like I said, questionnaires are very tricky and they will be very different depending on the story being told, but this list at least gives you a good idea of the kind of beats you really need to hit to make sure that the questionnaire is complete. In summary, let's go through my Dread story writing process one more time. First step, decide on your villain or villains. What is the threat chasing your characters, the thing driving them on? Step 2, decide the location and put the characters in a cage inside of that location. Where is the game taking place? And what is keeping them from just running away? What is the thing that keeps them enclosed and in the story? Next step, give them an objective. What is it that they are trying to accomplish during this game? What is their thing that they need to get done so that the threat is no longer a threat? Next step, who are the characters in the story? The broad idea of the kind of characters, as well as the specific characters that each player will be playing. Next step, write your bullet point story outline. You need a bullet point list of ideas and story beats that you want to hit, while still leaving plenty of room for players to do what players do and throw a wrench in your plans and change how the story goes. Lastly, a victory condition has to be decided upon. What is the end of the game, the end of the story? What do the players need to accomplish to be successful in winning or surviving this game of Dread?
That is the how-to on writing your own Dread story and questionnaires. I hope all of you found this useful, helpful, and I hope you all give it a try. The Dread system's really, really fun, especially with Halloween right around the corner. Everyone here should try and write their own story, make their own questionnaires, and run a really fun, memorable game for their friends. If you found this helpful, please leave a like down below. If you have any other thoughts or advice on running a Dread game, please leave a comment down below. I'm sure anyone could get some good information there and have more advice on how to go about doing this. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.